The State Department shares a new standard for visa denials based on social media posts, financial donations, and memberships that support terrorist organizations. In a memo sent by Secretary of State Marco Rubio on the 25th of March, he instructs consular officers to conduct mandatory social media reviews in order to process student visa applications. Evidence that an applicant advocates for terrorist activity or otherwise demonstrates a degree of public approval or public advocacy for terrorist activity or a terrorist organization may be indicative of ineligibility, the memo says. The vetting process should extend to students in the U.S. as of the 7th of October 2023 whose visas are up for renewal. This comes on the heels of Hamas terrorist supporters protesting on U.S. college campuses.
Now, I think it's important. There's a clear distinction between protesting against the democratic order and protesting in favor of groups that advocate the slaughter and murder of innocent people, which is what many of these groups are supportive of. Beyond that, these groups are not just taking over. These are not sit-ins we're talking about. We are talking about buildings that have been vandalized, defaced, where they for months on end, and in some cases, we're just not going to continue to allow. I don't understand what people don't get. A visa is a gift. It's a voluntary thing. We decide to give you a visa. We deny visas all over the world every day for a variety of reasons, and that means we can also revoke those visas. No one's entitled to a visa. The activities presented to me meet the standard of what I've just described to you. People that are supportive of movements that run counter to the foreign policy of the United States. If necessary and a court compels us, we'll provide that information, but ultimately it's a visa. The judges don't issue student visas. There is no right to a student visa. We can cancel a student visa under the law just the same way that we can deny a student visa under the law, and we will do so in cases we find appropriate. The overwhelming majority of student visas in this country will not be revoked, because the overwhelming majority of people that are coming to this country to study are not involved and associated or aligned with organizations that seek to do damage in this country, and that frankly, organizations that hate the United States government and hate our way of life. So I just think it's crazy to continue to provide visas so people can come here and advocate for policies that are in direct contradiction of our national interests.
In contrast to pro-Hamas terrorist supporters on college campuses, the people of Gaza extend their protests against Hamas terrorists.
For the third day in a row, desperate Palestinians in Gaza are taking to the streets to protest against Hamas, demanding they leave power and end the war. After days of silence, the terror group finally responded to the growing public protests and downplayed them, insisting the demonstrations are directed against Israel, not against Hamas, and this despite signs and chants and visuals proving the opposite. There's more in this report.
A third day of demonstrations in the Gaza Strip against Hamas. The people of Beit Lahia, northern Gaza, has suffered the most, living in one of the most devastated areas of the Strip since Israel responded to the Hamas raid on southern Israel on October 7th. The protesters' main goals are to stop the war and end Hamas rule in Gaza.
Hamas, brothers, we've had enough. I swear to God we're tired. There's nothing. There's no house to stay in, no food, no salary, no family members remaining.
And on top of that, the Gazans suggested a non-partisan interim committee should be governing the Strip.
In my point of view, the solution will be to form a committee from the Gaza Strip managed by people who do not belong to any political party in the Gaza Strip, to manage the Strip temporarily, then to have elections or whatever.
Hamas senior official Osama Hamdan described the protesters as, quote, weak and cowards, while accusing Israel of being behind the demonstrations.
Some cowards and weaklings might say, wouldn't it have been safer not to fight and accept the status quo instead of losing these lives? Some idiots might say that, but I will tell you frankly, those who say such things are driven by dark rooms linked to our enemy, whose mission it is to weaken this nation.
The protesters, however, insist their demonstrations are spontaneous.
sheer volume of these protests, which are only growing, albeit yesterday was larger than today. But we're seeing continuous calls by local clan leaders to go out for a popular uprising against Hamas. The Arabic word for popular uprising is intifada. Israelis know that word very well and what that means, but the fact that local leaders in Gaza are calling for an intifada against Hamas is unprecedented, and if the current trajectory continues, Hamas will be pressured more and more to either act or to step down. Either way, ultimately, the current trajectory leads to Hamas being forced to leave the stage. Whether they'll be violent against the protesters in the process, that still remains to be seen.
Hamas issued its first official response to the protests happening in Gaza, claiming they are actually against Israel, and that, quote, there are those who are trying to divert the spontaneous protests to service the occupation's agenda. Meanwhile, in his speech at Knesset, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu made his first public comments about the anti-Hamas protests happening in Gaza.
בימים האחרונים ראינו עוד שינוי. ראינו דבר שאף פעם לא ראינו כמותו. ראינו הפגנות גדולות, גלויות ברצועת עזה נגד שלטון החמאס. עכשיו כבר ראינו הרבה הפגנות למען החמאס. ראינו את זה בבירות אירופה, בקמפוסים. באמריקה,
חברת הכנסת עאידה תומא סלימאן,
אבל הפגנות כאלה בעזה נגד החמאס, דבר כזה לא ראינו. יותר ויותר עזתים מבינים שהחמאס מביא עליהם חורבן ואבדון. וזה חשוב. כל זה מראה שהמדיניות שלנו עובדת.